Imagine a quiet hall in Ouagadougou filled not with soldiers or politicians, but with ordinary citizens, teachers, farmers, young students in their very first suits watching blue screens flicker across the room. You can almost hear their breaths as the lights dim and the continent's newest digital vision begins to take shape. There are no drums, no military parades, no flags being waved, just the soft hum of technology and the feeling that something bigger than all of us is unfolding, something Africa has waited generations to claim. This was the atmosphere inside Burkina Faso's Digital Week 2025, a gathering that looked less like a conference and more like a turning point. A place where elderly grandmothers sat beside teenage coders, where government ministers traded ideas with barefoot innovators from rural villages, and where one moment in particular sent shockwaves through the hall. A Ghanaian representative rose to speak, and with a voice filled with conviction, he called Ibrahim Traoré the President of Africa, not as a gesture of flattery, but as an acknowledgement of a young leader transforming his nation into a rising digital powerhouse. But why did Ghana choose those words? What has Burkina Faso done just in the past 2 years to reshape Africa's technological future? And why did Ghana, a country with its own advanced digital agenda, openly say that AI sovereignty in Africa begins with the courage of nations like Burkina Faso? These are not small questions. They cut into the heart of Africa's place in the 21st century and the world's shifting balance of power. Because today the real battlefield is no longer land or oil. It is information data algorithms and the ability of nations to control their digital destiny. If you believe Africa deserves a fair digital future, one built on dignity, intelligence, and sovereignty, stay with us. And if you feel you are among the first to witness this new chapter, I invite you to continue this journey with us. The morning of Digital Week 2025 began not with fanfare, but with the quiet shuffle of ordinary people finding their seats in a large modern hall in Ouagadougou. You could see mothers carrying infants on their backs, university students clutching notebooks, and older men in traditional woven fabric adjusting their glasses as they looked up at giant digital screens glowing softly above them. The air felt different, warm, expectant, almost sacred because everyone present knew they were stepping into a future their parents could never have imagined. As the lights dimmed, the first images that filled the room were of farms, clinics, schools, and dusty roads across Burkina Faso, simple places where AI could soon change daily life. A short video played, showing how machine learning tools were already helping farmers predict rainfall, helping nurses identify diseases earlier, and helping small businesses find new markets. For many in the room, this wasn't technology, it was hope. When the delegation from Ghana entered, people nodded respectfully. Ghana was the guest country of honor. It was known for its digital advancements, coding hubs, tech incubators, and national AI strategy. But what surprised the crowd was not Ghana's expertise. It was Ghana's admiration for Burkina Faso. The Ghanaian representative took the podium and paused for a moment, glancing around, letting the weight of the moment settle. Then he began slowly, clearly, by acknowledging the existence of something powerful happening in Burkina Faso. He expressed gratitude not as a routine diplomatic gesture, but as a sincere recognition of a nation stepping into a leadership role far larger than its borders. He thanked the people of Burkina Faso for inviting Ghana as a partner. He thanked the ministers present. But when he turned toward Ibrahim Traoré, calling him the President of Africa, the hall erupted into applause. Some people stood. Some wiped their eyes. Older women placed their hands on their hearts. Students grinned widely, whispering to one another. It wasn't the title that moved them. It was what the title represented: the belief that Africa could finally build a digital future authored by Africans themselves. Then Ghana began to lay out the heart of the event, the shared mission to make AI the engine of Africa's development. The speaker explained how Ghana views AI not as a luxury or an imported trend, but as a practical tool to improve lives. He talked about early medical diagnosis using AI models trained on African health data. He described how AI helps farmers predict crop yields and allows teachers to personalize learning for children in overcrowded classrooms. He spoke about Ghana's 1 Million Coders Initiative, a massive program teaching young people practical digital and AI skills. Every example brought murmurs of approval from the crowd. People could see their own lives in these stories, their farms, their clinics, their classrooms. It made technology feel human. Then came the declaration that tied Ghana's message to Burkina Faso's new identity: AI must be inclusive, AI must be ethical, AI must be sovereign. This was the turning point of the speech, not because of the technical jargon, but because of what it meant emotionally. To the people in that hall, many who had lived through decades of external interference, dependency, and imposed development models, sovereign AI meant freedom. It meant dignity. It meant the ability to build without permission. The speaker praised Burkina Faso for having the courage to create a platform where African nations could discuss AI on their own terms. He emphasized that this gathering was not just a conference. It was a declaration that Africa would not sit back and let global powers write the rules of the digital age. Instead, Africa would co-write them. The room felt united: Burkina Faso, Ghana, Mali, Niger, neighbors, brothers, partners. For the first time in many years, people felt the region wasn't reacting to history, it was shaping it. This was the heart of the event, a shared understanding that in the age of AI sovereignty isn't just political, it's technological. And Burkina Faso, once underestimated, now stood confidently at the center of that transformation. A faint hum passed through the hall as the Ghanaian representative paused mid-speech, letting the silence settle like a drumbeat. Even the children in the back row stopped fidgeting. Elderly men leaned forward. It was the kind of silence that comes right before something unforgettable happens. Then came the sentence that split the room open. "We call him in Ghana, the President of Africa. We call him the Thomas Sankara of our time." For a heartbeat, no one moved. And then the hall erupted. People rose to their feet so quickly that some chairs toppled over. Young students waved their programs in the air. Older women ululated in high, trembling voices. Ministers exchanged glances, some stunned, some proud, some visibly emotional. A group of farmers in dusty boots, invited as community representatives, clapped with both hands raised high above their heads. It was as if the entire room had been waiting for someone to say out loud what many had quietly believed. For the first time, a regional power openly recognized Burkina Faso's young leader as a continental figure, someone reshaping not just a country, but an entire vision of Africa's digital future. The Ghanaian speaker, sensing the reaction, repeated it with even more conviction: "The President of Africa." The applause intensified. A woman near the front row covered her mouth with her hands, tears gathering in her eyes. She later told a journalist that she had never imagined hearing those words spoken publicly, let alone at a global technology event. "We have suffered," she whispered, "but today we stand tall." But it wasn't just an emotional moment, it was political and deeply symbolic. By invoking Thomas Sankara, Ghana wasn't just praising Traore, it was aligning the modern AI revolution with the legacy of one of Africa's greatest independence leaders. Sankara stood for self-reliance, dignity, and sovereignty. To compare a sitting president to Sankara in a public forum was not casual. It was deliberate. It signaled that the technological fight ahead, the struggle for data sovereignty, digital independence, and ethical AI was as defining as the liberation struggles of the 20th century. Around the room, reactions varied, but followed the same emotional current. They nodded firmly. These countries' partners in the AS alliance saw this as validation of the direction they had taken. For them, Traore represented a shift away from dependency, a leader unafraid to chart a new path. Some fist-bumped each other, others filmed the moment on their phones. They viewed this recognition as proof that Africa's technological renaissance wasn't just theory, it was happening in front of them. Their faces carried a different expression, one of relief. They had lived through coups, poverty, drought, interference, and broken promises. To them, this moment represented something rare, a chance for the next generation to inherit a continent in control of its own narrative. Some exchanged cautious looks. They understood the geopolitical weight of Ghana's declaration. It wasn't only praise, it was a challenge to the established world order, a message that Africa was stepping onto the world stage with its own digital ambitions. After the applause softened, the Ghanaian representative shifted into a more urgent tone. He warned that if Africa failed to define its own AI frameworks, if data remained stored abroad, if algorithms were trained on foreign values, then the continent would once again become dependent, vulnerable, and invisible in the digital world. His message struck a nerve. He emphasized that responsible AI required African languages, African ethics, African data, and African engineers. It required a collective front because no single African nation could stand alone against global tech giants and geopolitical interests. Then he delivered the line that reignited the room: no country, no matter how advanced, can navigate the AI revolution alone. Africa must rise together or be rewritten from the outside. Another wave of applause, this time quieter, deeper, more solemn. People were not just reacting, they were absorbing the weight of the moment. For the first time, it felt like the continent wasn't just catching up with the world's technological progress, it was preparing to lead it. And at the center of this shift, both in symbolism and strategy, stood Burkina Faso and its young leader, whose presence alone had turned a digital conference into a continental declaration. Long before the speeches ended, you could already feel the ripple of change moving beyond the walls of the hall. Outside, market women leaned closer to radios. Motorcycle drivers paused under the shade of neem trees, listening to updates from Digital Week. Farmers walking through dusty fields glanced at their phones, reading messages from relatives in the capital. The reactions were small, quiet, human, but they revealed something undeniable. The announcements inside that hall were going to shape daily life far beyond Ouagadougou. For many Burkinabe citizens, AI had always sounded like something distant, something belonging to wealthy nations. But suddenly, through the words of Ghana and the leadership of Traore, it felt real and reachable. In rural communities, parents imagined a future where local clinics used AI-powered tools to detect illnesses early, sparing families costly and dangerous journeys. Teachers pictured classrooms where, even in overcrowded conditions, children could receive personalized lessons tailored to their abilities. Young farmers struggling with unpredictable weather whispered to one another about AI apps that could warn them before droughts or guide them on when to plant. People did not talk about technology. They talked about relief. They talked about security. They talked about dignity. For a population that had long endured instability, displacement, and economic hardship, the promise of AI meant more than innovation. It meant the possibility of finally catching up with the rest of the world on their own terms. Politically, the effects were just as powerful. Burkina Faso, once dismissed as a poor, landlocked nation, was suddenly being recognized as a regional center of digital leadership. Local politicians understood this shift immediately. For the first time in years, debates within the government were not about survival or crisis management, but about strategy, talent development, and long-term planning. Civil servants spoke about the need for digital literacy programs in every province. Young professionals applied for new innovation grants. Universities began discussing partnerships to train data scientists and AI engineers inside the country rather than sending students abroad. And for many citizens, the presence of Traore at the heart of this transformation strengthened a sense of national unity. He wasn't just a political figure anymore. He had become a symbol of a generation choosing innovation over dependency. The political effect did not stop at the border. In Ghana, the speech caused waves of excitement among young engineers and policymakers. In Mali and Niger, governments publicly echoed Ghana's sentiment, praising Burkina Faso for resetting the regional narrative. Even countries outside the alliance watched carefully. The message was clear: if Burkina Faso could lead in AI, any African nation could. ECOWAS ministers quietly acknowledged that the region's digital strategy might now need to be rewritten, with Burkina Faso playing a central guiding role. This idea would have been unthinkable only a few years earlier. On the international stage, the consequences were more complex. The discussion of AI sovereignty sent a subtle warning to global powers, especially those accustomed to shaping Africa's digital infrastructure. Ghana's public declaration put the world on notice. Africa was no longer content with being a consumer market for foreign technology. Burkina Faso's bold direction implied a future where African nations stored their own data, built their own models, trained their own engineers, and most importantly, refused technological dependency. For many in the hall, this was more than policy. It was the beginning of a political renaissance, one rooted not in ideology, but in digital empowerment. And that understanding, quiet, steady, unstoppable, was perhaps the most profound consequence of all. Outside the conference hall, a soft evening wind swept across Ouagadougou's streets. In small cafes lit by dim bulbs, Burkinabe citizens gathered around televisions broadcasting highlights of the event. Some were smiling, others thoughtful, and a few quietly wondering how all this talk of AI and sovereignty might be perceived far beyond Africa's borders, especially in the United States. For American observers, particularly those who had spent decades watching U.S.-Africa relations shift from aid to diplomacy, and now to technological competition, the developments in Burkina Faso were impossible to ignore. From Washington's perspective, the rise of a digital alliance in West Africa signaled a dramatic change. AI had become the new frontier of geopolitical influence, and seeing countries like Burkina Faso and Ghana openly championing AI sovereignty suggested a future where African nations refused to rely entirely on Western platforms or infrastructure. Some U.S. analysts viewed this with curiosity. They saw an opportunity American universities could partner with African institutions sharing research on health models, climate prediction tools, or agricultural optimization. American companies could collaborate on ethically designed AI systems built with African languages and cultural contexts. But others saw a challenge. If Africa built its own data systems and its own AI models, then U.S. tech giants long dominant across the continent could gradually lose influence. Data would no longer be exported to servers abroad. Digital policy would be written in African capitals, not Silicon Valley boardrooms. For many American viewers above 60, this shift echoed something familiar, the feeling of watching the world reorganize itself just as they had seen during the Cold War and the post-9/11 era. Only now the battleground wasn't land or oil, it was algorithms. Across Europe, reactions were similarly mixed. Policy experts noted that West Africa's pivot toward technological independence could weaken long-standing digital partnerships. At the same time, European humanitarian groups quietly expressed optimism, believing that AI tailored for African realities could improve healthcare, food security, and crisis response more effectively than imported systems. Media outlets in some Western countries, however, adopted a cautious tone, framing the rise of Traore and the region's interest in sovereign AI as nationalistic or unexpectedly bold. But to Africans, boldness wasn't a threat, it was liberation. In China, commentators recognized the opportunity. They saw Africa's move toward independent AI as a potential opening for partnerships outside the traditional Western sphere. Russia expressed similar sentiments, praising Burkina Faso for reshaping global multipolarity. Meanwhile, the African diaspora from Atlanta to Paris to Kingston responded with pride. Social media lit up with messages celebrating a continent finally asserting control over its digital future. Older diaspora members, many who had lived through decades of stereotypes about Africa being technologically behind, expressed deep emotion, seeing African leaders claim the future with confidence. For the U.S., the rise of digital sovereignty in Africa carries a simple lesson: partnership must replace paternalism. Many Americans over 60 understand this better than younger generations. They grew up witnessing eras of intervention aid dependencies and diplomatic tension. They know that respect, not control, is what builds lasting alliances. Burkina Faso and Ghana were not rejecting the world. They were simply asserting their right to shape it. And for the first time in a long time, the world was being asked to listen. As the final session of Digital Week 2025 ended, people slowly drifted out of the hall into the cool Ouagadougou night. The city lights flickered gently across the streets, reflecting off tin roofs and dusty windows, and for a moment you could almost feel the weight of history settling over the capital. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was something quieter, deeper, like the calm that follows a revelation. Because what happened in that hall was not just a celebration of digital innovation. It was the announcement of a new era, a declaration that Africa, long underestimated in global conversations, would no longer be a passive observer in the technological revolution. Ghana's bold recognition of Ibrahim Traoré, the shared vision of AI sovereignty, and the emotional unity of the region created a powerful signal to the world: Africa is stepping forward, not asking permission. But every new era carries a warning. If Africa does not protect its data, others will own its future. If African languages and cultures are not built into AI models, they risk fading from the digital world entirely. If African governments do not cooperate across borders, then global powers old and new will fill the vacuum and shape the rules. The danger is not theoretical. History shows us what happens when Africa's resources, whether gold, cotton, land, or labor, are managed from the outside. Digital resources are no different. The algorithms that determine healthcare access, crop planting, education quality, and even political stability will soon matter as much as natural resources. And the continent must decide now whether those systems will be imported or created. Yet in the midst of this warning, there is a sense of profound possibility. Burkina Faso is proving that leadership does not require wealth, it requires courage. Ghana is proving that a nation can honor the past while shaping a digital future. Mali and Niger are proving that regional unity is stronger than isolation. And the African diaspora is reminding the world that identity, talent, and innovation do not stop at borders. For viewers in the United States, especially those who have lived long enough to witness the world reinvent itself many times, the question becomes deeply personal. Do you believe Africa can finally shape a digital future free from outside control? And do you think President Ibrahim Traoré's national reform strategies are truly effective, or should another leader carry this vision forward? Your voice matters. Your perspective matters. If you feel you are among the first to understand this turning point, share this story. If you believe that truth is more important than headlines, subscribe and stay with us. And if you stand with those building a sovereign digital Africa, let your presence be known. The future is being written now. The world is watching, and Africa is rising.